welcome. Happy Thursday. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for those of you who are with us live on YouTube, those joining from our different platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, but also those who are on Instagram. Welcome. This is a feature that we just started using, so I'm excited to invite everyone that's watching live on our Instagram page and invite you to ask your questions in the comments. None of your names will show up on screen, so know that your question is safe to ask, and we will just be reading them out loud here so that those can be addressed. So if you are new to this channel, new to my page, welcome. If you are continue to follow us, also welcome back. Thank you for being in our community. I am Susan Bereshai, founder of C Admissions. My job is to coach applicants through the MBA journey, guiding them through the process of telling their story to top 20 business schools. I have a live every week for 30 minutes on Thursdays where I discuss different components of the MBA application or business school application process. So I invite you to join, subscribe to our YouTube channel, connect, follow our other pages so you can also get access to our lives. And also, if you register to our events, we will be sending you reminders and notifying you of the event before it goes live so that you can join us then, but also you will have replays for you as well. So with that, I'm excited today to start the conversation to move to the next phase of the MBA application journey, particularly for those in round 2, and starting to prepare for the MBA interview. Today, we're going to talk about the behavior questions, which are always a little bit tricky, and I want to really make sure that you guys have at least a macro level, if not personalized, a macro level idea of how to handle these. If you want coaching in this process, I invite you to reach out to us. There is a link on our comments on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, or just visit cadmissions.com and request a call with me to discuss how we can support you. Next week, we will be continuing the conversation on the MBA interviews to prepare for unexpected questions. How do you go about handling those? So on January 18th, I invite you to join that session, register for that session, to help guide you essentially on how to answer unexpected questions in an MBA interview. So with that, why don't we get started? I will be going through a few slides that I've prepared in advance just to anchor our discussion. And then I will be asking or answering questions, rather, the ones that have come through a registration form, as well as the ones that are asked live. If you haven't registered, that's totally okay. Do write your questions in the comments and know that we won't share your name on screen. So even in the replay, it won't show there. So you are totally safe to ask your questions in the most genuine way. So with that, why don't we get started? So a very brief intro of myself. I am an alumnus of NYU and Yale, and I've been an admission coach for about 8 years now, coaching young, ambitious professionals who are targeting top 20 business schools. I have a 94% placement rate, which means those that follow my process, 94% of them are admitted to at least one of their target institutions. And I actually really love what I do. So I can talk about this all day, but why don't we get started in what is on the agenda for today? So today I'm going to cover the MBA interview, the importance of the behavior questions, what are schools looking for, how to prepare for behavior interview questions using the STAR method, and then a few common behavior interview questions that may come up that you should have your answers ready. However way they're actually asked, meaning however the question is formed. These are examples that you will need to have on your repository to really be effectively answering questions in your MBA interview. So, why are interviews so important? Well, the interview allows the admission team to gauge your interest in the program, understand how much thought have you put into why do you want to do what you want to do, and have you put in research on why is it that you are interested in this particular school. Believe it or not, there are many applicants who are submitting applications just to submit the applications because they have their target interests. And those kinds of applicants are not, they can be strong, but they're not necessarily the kinds of applicants that schools necessarily care about, because they will obviously see themselves as they are not as interested in this given school. So they would rather give the opportunities to someone who is actually interested in attending. So the interview, it's really that conversational discussion on how on the admission team's perspective to gauge your interest in the program. They're also going to look at what you're able to contribute to the classroom. What kind of experiences do you bring to the table? How do you speak about those experiences? Are you able to communicate in an effective way that others can understand you? Particularly those of you who are watching who are engineering backgrounds. Can you tell to someone who's not an engineer what it is that you do, what your contributions have been? They also look for individuals who have feasible goals. Business school, it's a wonderful program. It opens many doors, but it doesn't open every door. And the business schools are looking to admit individuals who have ambitious but also realistic goals. And of course, the culture fit. While schools have large classes, some of them, and others have small classes, all of them are really looking to curate a classroom that is going to not only be a representation of the business world, but also, or where they want the business world to go, but also it allows students to learn from each other as much as they're learning also from the professors and the other resources that the schools offer. So the interview allows them to see how you engage with others, what your thinking process is like, so that they can really gauge if the culture fit is there. So why are behavior questions important? Specifically, the behavior questions are geared towards understanding how you engage with other individuals. So they're not about your goals. They're not about, walk me through your resume, those kinds of very standard MBA questions. These are more specific to your own experiences. So the behavior questions allow the admission team to really understand your leadership potential. How have you showed up in other environments? How have you worked with others? Where have you taken ownership? How do you take ownership of the work that you have done? They're going to evaluate your work experience in comparison to other individuals in the applicant pool like you. Are you able to bring differentiated experiences that will make you stand out and that will add value to the classroom? They're also assessing your soft skills. At the end of the day, this is a collaborative community, or schools are looking to put together collaborative communities, and your soft skills are very important in that process. They're also oftentimes also verifying what it is that you wrote in your resume and your applications. Are you able to speak to it, or are you, making up stories of things that you wish you would have done but didn't exactly do them in that way? And then, of course, diversity of perspectives are also looked at in those conversations. And like I mentioned earlier, culture fit as well in how you engage with the interviewer. Are you able to hold a conversation and are not showing up there like a robot, essentially? Okay, so how to prepare for behavior interview questions, or that experience. You are going to compile, I strongly suggest that you compile a repository of examples that you can share from various categories of experiences. Most of the time, the questions are geared towards something that you have done that was somewhat of a challenge. So difficult conversation, challenges, failure in a project, or some kind of setback in a project. Those are kinds of questions that they're looking for, or examples they're looking for, because If everything was, it went smoothly, then you wouldn't have learned much from that experience, right? So they're really looking to see how you engage with challenges. So have a lot of those examples, a lot of those kinds of examples, and we'll talk more about some of the most common questions when it comes to behavior questions in an interview in a few slides from now. When you prepare your responses, you should practice on using either the STAR or the CAR method in structuring your responses. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. CAR stands for context, action, result. Whichever one is easier for you, go with that one. For me, CAR is easy because it's just fewer acronyms I have to remember, but I know some people are more comfortable with the STAR, whichever you're used to, so long as you're following a logical process around how you convey communication, how you convey experiences to someone else to understand. You don't want to leave the interviewer trying to figure out where you're going with your responses, because that leads to confusion. And anytime we're confused, we are only focusing on why are we so confused. So meaning they're not going to pay full attention to all the details that you're incorporating, or going to miss important things that you're trying to communicate. But in your formulation, you haven't really taken the time to communicate in a way that others can understand, which is a red flag if you're going to be a future leader where communication is key. So, and then of course, be ready to dive deeper into your examples. So while you're not going to respond to a behavior type question with a 5-minute presentation of what you have done, you should be ready to be able to dive deeper into responding to follow-up questions that the interviewer may have. So this is where they're really testing and validating the content that you've shared with them also, so that they fully understand what you can contribute. So let's look at the STAR method because that's the title of this presentation. So I'm going to follow in that order. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. Situation, it's essentially the context of the problem you're looking to solve. What is the big picture of what you're trying to solve? Task is what are you tasked to do, right? To solve this big picture problem, or to contribute to solving the big picture problem. What actions have you taken to actually resolve that issue? And then, of course, the results. What was the outcome of the efforts that you and your team have put together or have worked on, or you individually, because it could be an example where you are the main protagonist, and what was the result of that? So I'm going to use an example of someone that works in retail. And you're working for a retail company that has both a brick and mortar store front as well as an online platform where they sell. And the problem that the C-suite executives have identified is that they're following different processes, and operationally they're not being as efficient as they can. And you are tasked to build an omni-channel, a consolidated way of both stores, both divisions to follow the same process, which the intent is to save money, save time, etc. So the way you would present this, it would be literally, I work for this company who has a brick and mortar and an online channel, and we were looking for ways to bring about streamline operations, and I was tasked to build an omni-channel. I worked with my internal team to build a macro level strategy, as well as with each individual teams that run the two divisions, to come up with the most effective way that everyone can benefit from this omni-channel approach. You provide a little bit more detail in there, and then you've implemented this initiative and show the success and the outcome of this initiative. It's a really straightforward example. Obviously, I'm giving you a very macro perspective in here, but you get the point. I'm hoping that how you need to go about answering these questions. So the listener is really understand where you're trying to go with this, and then can follow along very smoothly in your responses. And if you do it effectively enough, there are probably not going to be a lot of follow-up questions unless something there is quite interesting that they want to know. They have maybe personal curiosities of how you've handled it, especially if it's someone who is in the same field as you are. Okay, so what are some common behavior questions? Some common behavior questions that you should have examples for. And what I mean by this is you should try to have several examples, not just one example that answers all questions. Because if you go to in an interview and you have one example for all of your questions, the interviewer will be left confused, thinking that you have had no other experiences but this one example. Okay, so with that, here are some examples that you can, or these are some questions, common questions that you can think about and start putting together examples for. So describe a situation where you had to work with a difficult team member, right? This is obviously looking at how you handle conflict. Tell me about a time you had to make difficult decisions under pressure. As a future leader, this is something you are going to have to do, and being able to showcase how you've done this in the past is going to be very important. Or yes, in the past, how you've done it in the past is going to be really important to showcase how you'll be able to do this in the future. Tell me about a situation in which you had to work in a diverse team with individuals from different cultural backgrounds. This is a very specific question, but schools that particularly value the diversity and have a really international student body, this question is really important for them. They want to know how you work with individuals who approach business very differently than you do. And discuss a situation in which you failed to achieve a goal or faced a setback. A very, very common question. Again, they want to see how you're handling, how you are moving from setback, right? Not that you don't have setbacks, because everyone has setbacks. What's important to remember here is that what they're really looking for is to showcase how you move from a setback, how you learn from a setback, what action do you take after that setback takes place. Excellent. So now let's dive into questions. I hope you've been jotting notes down and coming up with questions. Write them in on your Instagram comment section in our live so that we can answer those questions. Write them in any platform that you are in, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So that I can start answering questions. Excellent. All right, so why don't we start with questions that have come in through the registration form. And I also just want to take the moment to remind everyone that on January 18th, we're going to discuss the unexpected questions in an interview, in an MBA interview, and how to handle those questions. So I invite you to register to that event, join us, and come prepared with your own questions so that I can answer as many of those as possible. And if you want to talk with me about coaching you through on a one-on-one basis in the interview itself, please request a consultation so we can get started, because this process takes time to prepare, not only essentially selecting an example, but also practicing your delivery, because it's not just about answering a question, it's also about how you go about answering the question. It's about your body language. It's about our nervous tics. All of those components are part of the interview preparation, and typically you're not able to do those in one day. Okay, so let's get started with questions. All right. So how should one prepare for behavior interview questions, and what strategies are best answering them effectively? I would start by preparing answers to the questions I just gave in the last slide. That should give you a really strong starting point to answer those questions. Then the way you are preparing to answer the questions, once you identify your examples, is using the STAR method. So if you go to the penultimate slide, you're going to then see kind of the structure, follow that structure, and that should give you a really strong foundation. But it's not just about following the structure and doing it once. You really have to practice delivering it, because you can practice 1,000 different questions, and the probability is that the question will be asked differently in the interview. You don't want to be thrown off. You want to be really able to answer the question, use examples that you've prepared for, and present them in a way that answers the actual given question that you have been asked. Excellent. What variety of questions can be expected in an interview, including any that might pertain to current events? It really depends on who the interviewer is from the perspective of current events. They may ask you, and they also may ask you based on your goals. So what is it that you're looking to do, and how does that connect to the broader geopolitical events that are happening? So you can expect the questions to be asked, and some school asks specifically those kinds of questions. So like Harvard is notorious for asking those kinds of questions. But then most of the interviews are really about you, about your experiences that you've had. So I would focus on really being able to tell your story, being able to speak to your goals, be able to speak to why have you chosen this particular program, why is it the right fit for you, and of course, some of the questions that we covered here in our slide, but there are obviously many, many more questions. When I work with applicants, we go through 40 questions by the time they're done with our preparation process. And 99%, so every client that is interviewed, they've reported that 99% of the questions we had covered in our mock preparation have been actually asked by the interviewer. So it's a really robust process, but it also means that there's a lot of questions and a lot of variations of questions to go through to really make sure that you're able to leverage what you've prepared to answer the questions most effectively, and not be thrown off if a question is not asked exactly the same as you have prepared. Excellent. So how can I ensure my answers are both concise and precise? Excellent. Follow the STAR method. I know now I'm repeating myself here, but really do follow the STAR method. I know it's not very pretty and it's not very creative as far as presenting a story, but business schools are not looking for creativity. They are looking for clarity. They're looking for conciseness. They're looking for to really understand your experiences in a way that they don't need to understand your industry's insights, industry jargon, essentially. So that's your priority as an applicant, is to be able to convey your experiences in that very clear language that someone in business school can understand. Excellent. So we have 5 more minutes. Write your questions in the comments, so that I can answer some of them here live. All right, next question. So what approach should I take if faced with unexpected question during an interview, and how can I quickly formulate a response? First, you should register to our event next week, so that we can talk more about that. But essentially, an unexpected question, you are essentially needing to think about what is something as similar to the question that some experience that you have that closely matches the experience or the question rather that you're being asked. And what I mean by that is to say that sometimes you're asked a question where you haven't had an experience like that previously, and you have to be able to discern if you can speak in a cohesive way about something, or you're going to just try to answer a question and not really be able to answer effectively, which then just takes away points from your actual interview. So if you know that you can't answer a question because you haven't had that experience, you need to claim it. You need to Be upfront with it and say, I have not experienced something like that, but something similar is this. So that's your first responsibility as an interviewee, is to be honest with you when you did not have those kinds of experiences. But I will say that this ability and confidence only comes with practice, right? If you are still in the process of thinking about examples and coming up with examples until the 11th hour, you are going to fumble if this happens, because you haven't given enough thought of all your experiences. You haven't given enough preparatory work to answer a question or multiple question with a similar example, so that you're able to do this very effectively. Excellent. Next question. Will a less prepared response negatively impact my evaluation, given the impossibility of preparing for every potential question? Absolutely, they're not expecting perfection. They are expecting, however, you to be able to communicate effectively. So even if you fumble a little bit, that's totally okay. Sometimes, like, people have had clients in the past that have told me that they totally confused the name of a club from one school to another, and the interviewer pointed it out, and they were still able to be admitted because everything else in the interview was really, really strong. But they corrected themselves, and it's really that's the reality, is that we are all human. We all make mistakes, but it's not to it's really not about not owning the mistake that you've made, but really just correcting yourself and say, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and you corrected with the right thing that you wanted to say. Excellent. How can I follow up on my responses if prompted by interviewer for more information or clarification? So you are going to essentially then continue the conversation based on what they are asking you. So that means that first and foremost, the meaning there is typically that you haven't done it in most situations, not in everyone, but in most situations, the interviewer is either confused, unclear of what you have communicated previously, and they're asking a follow-up question. So in those situations, you really want to take a moment, not a long time, but just a moment, to think about what haven't you communicated effectively. And then make sure that you are preparing a response that really is a little bit more clear than what you initially had communicated. So if they're asking a little bit more about your process, that means that you kind of skim through it really quickly. They didn't even know what you did. So this means then you need to go a little bit in more detail, follow a logical progress of events, so that given that you already give them the context and what you were trying to do, then a more sort of like a progress of events, what happened, it can make a lot of sense without going into too much detail and then losing them again in the process of all the detail that you're sharing. Excellent. Wonderful. So we are out of time. Thank you so much for being here with us. Today, I invite you to share this video to with your friends and all of those who are thinking about an MBA, going through an MBA, will be going through an MBA at some point in the future, because all this information, it's really important for that process. And this can also be helpful for some that are just going through interviews, period. Subscribe to our channel, connect with us on the various different platforms. We love to hear your comments. We love to hear your feedback, because that's really, really helpful to us to understand what resonates, what more you want to see from us. So thank you. I will see you next week.